the idea about the DBT talk as well, very interesting. As I was exploring this tool, also had some network contacts say that some of these things for data quality can be done in DBT workflows. And so if there's something in this talk that appeals to you, then that other talk may also have something for you. Just friendly saying. But in addition to Glenn's introductions, I'll show you some pictures that back that up. This one here is me in front of, I don't know if you've ever seen one of those Van de Graaff generators, like at a science museum or something, made your hair stick out. That's an incredibly large version of that, which was a place that I used to work, and it has the world record, I think, still for the largest potential difference being held. And every once in a while, that thing will go off and it sounds like a lightning strike inside that building. It's pretty wild, some of the stuff that I've been able to do throughout my life and career. I know, as we were talking in the room earlier, there was some people coming from different backgrounds into the data space. I know in DataNerds, we have plenty of former academics or people seeking to be former academics. And so you have a friendly ear with me. It was fun while it lasted. I got to do some really fun stuff. Happy to talk to you about that later on as well. But yeah, we're going to go into a description of the problem. And I hope I don't overstate this at all in the course of the talk, but I think it's kind of hard to overstate, because getting into data space, it was clear to me from square one that this was going to be a problem. It was something to prepare for in my mindset, because dealing with whatever it means for data quality, the messiness of data, inconsistencies in data was going to be, if I was lucky, it might not be an overwhelming majority of my job, but it was most certainly going to be the majority of my job, was just dealing with some of these needly little issues that crop up and never go away. There's always something in this space to be solved for. But with that, data comes with context, and that context can be misunderstood. And I've got a few examples in here of the examples from a data dinosaur that really emphasize this point, that people can be really good at recognizing patterns if they know what patterns they should expect. But expectations are something that need managed as well. So not only is data messy, but so is metadata, the data about your data, and making sure like you properly set that context. Has anyone ever had that, any data practitioner in the room or on Zoom not found that to be their experience? Just curious, because I'd love to meet you. Somewhat sarcastic. But what's the cost? There was a Forbes study that's often cited, $9.7 million average impact of poor data on any given business. Like, this is an important problem. If you lose business because you didn't manage your client expectations well, and you sent them, a report that was based off of messy data, that can really be an issue. Plus the personnel, right? The time it takes just to deal with data also impacts these costs. And data is messy. This is this point. Data can be inconsistent depending on its source. The data's context may not be apparent to a new user. Data can be wrong, or data can change unexpectedly, and there can be unexpected changes and updates to data right underneath your feet as you're going. And this is the world that we live in as practitioners of data. Should not be a surprise to anybody. But I want to give some examples as well of just the human piece of the messiness in data. And I really love, this is one of my favorite figures, and the actual caption for the figure in this academic paper, an example dinosaur. And I want to show you just some of these contextual lessons there. But actually, before I do that, like when I go through this description of the messiness of data, is there anything that I missed? Because I'm really approaching this talk, from the position of a learner. I'm a year and 9 months in a data space after being in academics. I'm 3 months a data scientist. I still have a lot to learn in this space. So please feel free to interrupt and interject if there's anything in here that I missed.
One of the things that I found, if you go into it, that you may understand the context and the expectation, and it's proving out. So someone that's just new and it comes in and it's like, yeah, but so everything's looking well until you get a fresh set of eyes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
It's even though everything's proving out, you need to be careful that you don't get introduce your own bias into it, make it just like statistics, make it look like what you want it to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in case folks couldn't hear us on Zoom, there's a comment in the room that, yeah, a fresh set of eyes can bring a new perspective to data and reveal things that you missed, because there's blindness in your approach to data, or just things that you've just accepted and made, edge case handles for in your code base that someone else comes in and reminds you, like, maybe there's a better way. And so one of the ways that data can be misunderstood, and I think there's some stats people in the room that might connect to this example. I'm curious, has anybody seen this example before? One in the room? Excellent. Anyone on Zoom ever seen this example before? That you can create, 13 different graphs. They have the same two-dimensional distribution for their average, for their standard deviation, and even their Pearson correlation coefficient. So, I mean, for all the lovely measures that data scientists like to look at, these are identical. As soon as you look at it with your human eyes, which are amazing, you see that they're not the same. And the process to create this data set is very interesting, but just the fact itself is a powerful lesson to me that low key had some individuals in our business that were making standard deviation cuts on a distribution that was exceedingly not normal, and it doesn't really make sense to do that. But you should understand how your data is distributed, and sometimes you just really have to look at it. But that's hard, especially if it's big data. But all right, maybe some middle ground in between actually looking at it with your human eyes and setting reasonable expectations on your data. Maybe there's a solve for it. Again, data can be misunderstood. Lesson 2 from the data dinosaur. Apart from looking at the distribution, kind of have to know what that distribution should be. That can be a test and iterate process. So what they did in this particular study is they showed a bunch of people lots of different graphs of two-dimensional data. And were asking, or even leading the audience, to those figures, what kinds of things they might expect to see in the data. And every once in a while, one of those two-dimensional distributions just had a dinosaur in it, and they didn't notice. Because when you're looking at two-dimensional data, seeing the figure of a dinosaur in there is not your first expectation, unless you have that context knowledge set. And once the researchers set that context for the people viewing these, it's picked out at a much higher rate. Just data blindness, right, is also a part of what's going on here, and why all data entities, anyone working in this data space, also needs really good data communicators and good data visualization and data storytellers. Because if you don't tell the story that there's a dinosaur in this plot, people are going to miss it. And I think that's a very powerful lesson as well. Any questions on the lessons of the day of the dinosaur, either looking at the distribution or just understanding what's going on here with the second lesson, knowing what to expect? Excellent. We'll move on. If anybody knows of any other data dinosaur publications, by the way, do send them to me, because when I joined my current company, my boss's boss said every talk that I give should probably have a data dinosaur in it somewhere. So I'm always collecting this particular metaphor in data science. Data analytics as well. So this was just my crude attempt to wrap some words around the kind of solution that I'm looking for when it comes to data quality. And again, this is one where I'm open to feedback. That my data quality solution should be customizable, readable, automatable for certain things that I want to do with the insight of data quality success or failure, that whatever the output is should be interpretable, scalable, and then portable or integrable with other systems. And again, anything I miss in there? Got to know from Alex, which is pretty high bar for me. Very good. And I can see chat as well if there's any interest in dropping something in chat there. You can tell I came from academics or working with the government, because this does spell crazy, and I want a crazy solution. So you got to come up with a good acronym when you're making a list like this, right? That's just the first job. Well, very good. So wanted to go through some of the things that we tried in the data quality space. Simple, easy button, just push profile report and see what happens. Anybody not familiar with Panda's profile reports and want to see a little? Yeah, okay. I got a few takers on that. Very good. Let me skip through. So there's an example of an output, and you'll see, for example, on screen, there's a few different things that you get out of it. This is our real data. Some of the columns that we look at, I'm in the medical space. So there's, for example, I need to know whether or not someone is actually eligible for insurance or something like that. That's the basic description of some of these columns here. But it gives you something that looks basically like this, and you can dive deeper. You can, it leverages, for example, the data frame describe function. So you see min values, max values, number of missing values. If, for example, this one, prospective paid, this column is just 0 all the time. That's probably maybe something I want to look into. So there are things that you can do just with Python, pandas, right out of the box. It's fine. And it is helpful. There's actually some really nice things where it will show you correlations right out of the box. And I've actually used those in certain cases as well. You can use them separately, or you can wrap them all up into what's called this profile report. And it's a very handy tool because it's just that easy. You just push that on your data frame and hit enter, and it takes a minute and it runs. But it's not customizable unless you feel like completely reworking your Pandas source code. Not something I want to dive into. So I'm going to call that not customizable at all. Just basically because I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to customize Pandas. You could wrap scripts around it. It's pretty readable and interpretable. It served some good purposes, especially when we got a new source of data that I could go through and really do some basic error checking. And so it serves its niche, but it's not a complete solution. Is anybody working in data somewhere and using profile report as your main data quality control for either analytics or data science? Not seeing any nods in the room. Don't see any confirmation on chat. There we go. Move on. So you can build your own solution. And that's very common in I'll just do it myself. And I tell you what, that's often the default too in the academic circles and with my physics friends. Like, nah, I'll just build it myself. It's fine. I'm not going to go bother the administration and get a process and cost involved. I'll just do it. And it's okay. It's very customizable because we built it ourselves. It takes a lot of time to make it very readable and automatable if you want to build all that from scratch. So I'll say, kind of interpretable, hopefully, especially if it's just me that's using it, then I should hope it's interpretable. But it's not very scalable and it's not very portable or integrable with other systems. It's just the thing itself. And so, for example, got a nice little alert there in our Power BI dashboard that at some point during a measurement period of interest, we had more than a 20% change in the number of individuals that we were looking at. That's a reasonable threshold. And so some of these aggregated measures and customized measures in this Power BI dashboard, we can now look at and use. And again, this serves its use case against a single source of siloed data within our organization. And this connects to a data warehouse that we have. And as part of spinning up that project, we spun up this QA against that data source. And again, served its purpose, but it doesn't really continue to do what we need it to do as data within my particular organization continues to grow and scale, and hopes to continue to keep my own good self in business and employed at the company, right? So that's an example from our Power BI dashboard. Any questions on some of the things that we've tried before I move on and tell you about my latest exploration into a tool called Great Expectations? Yeah.
So for some of your Power BI solutions, I was wondering why you chose to say that it wasn't very integratable or scalable?
Yeah. So it's not integrable, it's not portable is maybe another word I could choose, because, for example, right now, we are in the process of removing some of the data silos within our organization, and we're getting a sandbox put in place in a Databricks environment, and taking this into Databricks is not really going to work as well for us. So as soon as I move my data into a new context and a new data architecture, this Power BI dashboard and the SQL query that accompanies it just doesn't easily move over into that space. It could, but the data that for our purposes we want to QA is also going to be a lot larger, because there's an initiative within our company to really remove data silos, bring everything together. A lot of work, and it's a lot of new data that, for example, I haven't been exposed to, so I don't necessarily know from the outset what to expect of that data. And so that initiative has pushed me into looking at other tools that might be a little bit more friendly and different in different spaces and data architectures, rather than just having a fixed SQL query that pulls it into a Power BI dashboard. And that process just seems a little bit clunky. Also, the person who really did a lot of the work in that Power BI dashboard has left the company, and so it's also a fair time to consider alternatives and look around. So some good reasons and some just really pragmatic reasons. Does that answer the question of why I say it's not really integrable, portable with other things? Okay, great. Any other questions? Very good. We will move on. So in preparation for this talk, I reached out to the DataNerds Slack as well as to Nash Dev, and said, I'm gonna give a talk. What should I give a talk on? And this kind of bubbled up through that process. Got some interest here. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna learn what is Great Expectations. And so what you're seeing here is just my learnings. And as I went through it, what I really want to say is, these are really just quotes from this website. Honestly, the documentation and the website that supports this tool, the tutorial that I went through, as well as reading through the process for further customizing this tool, making contributions to this tool, was so very friendly and so pedagogical. It steps you through really every part of the process of using it. I was really wondering what exactly I was going to bring to the table, because a lot of the value that one could bring is already documented on their website and going through that process. But one of the things that did stand out to me, and as I was doing some learning about Databricks, heard from a presenter in that space saying, when you're engaging with a new tool, the philosophy is often so much more important than the syntax. And I appreciated that phrase, and I'll almost claim it as my own. But to say that I saw something like a growth mindset mentality shining through in this tool, that walking through these tutorial steps, set up, connect to data, create expectations, validate that data, was just really painfully simple to go through. I was up and running in an hour and blew through the tutorial. And the next time I sat down to do it, I ran through the tutorial steps on my own data and had some intention to go through a little bit deeper into the tool, but just so you know, that's about as far as I got. But it was enough for me to really have some confidence in the basics of what's being offered here. And then once our Databricks environment is up and running, then I'll probably dive more into the tool and see how it works in that environment. Probably before then, there's not much left to do necessarily. I did also come across a somewhat interesting use case that somewhat stopped right here with open metadata, and I'm not sure how much familiarity there is with that offering, but using that as a step in their process to really just generate the data docs, which is part of what Great Expectations offers, but they do that, and it appeared to be that it just stops there, and they create metadata and documentation through this tool. Carefully saying that it does not work as a pipeline execution framework. That was what I was referring to with DBT, and I think it's called DBT tests. Has a lot of this. So if that's in your environment, at least I know one other person that decided not to use this because there was enough functionality in DBT tests, and that's what they were using for that.
Even an extension DB, it's like DB Great Expectations, where there's some more robust things that Great Expectations does over the space.
Yeah, very good. So in case you couldn't hear that on Zoom, there's things that Great Expectations does with DB Great Expectations. All right. Yeah, but yeah, and I will kind of show off some of that later on. Okay, so Great Expectations. Thank you, Alice. Posted it in chat, and so I'll have it here for anyone in the room that needs it later. So Great Expectations. Well, what is an expectation? An expectation is something like this, where maybe it's small to see, but this class name here is expect table row count to equal other table. And so you're having table-wise comparisons that run in this expectation. And I looked at this expectation and said, oh, I have a use case for that. For the data sets that I work with, I have monthly data on individuals, and then I have a source of truth of the number of total individuals. And I might want to say, for a given reporting period, take the maximum eligible month for my monthly data set and make sure that that's the same number of members as I get out of my source of truth for what that number of members to be. So I can set that clear expectation. And hopefully that is sensible of an example. It was really interesting to see that that this did not have a pandas implementation. So you can see that listed here. That should be pretty easy to contribute to. I'm surprised because this is, you can also see like this is a core expectation. So I was also surprised that this was not implemented in Pandas. So there's some good information here as you go through the expectation library for what's available, what's not. You can search on each of these tags within the website. But it does seem like there's plenty of room to make contribution. And I will say, again, through this website, they make contribution look very easy. But there we go. There are a number of different kinds of expectations that one can set. So mapping across a number of different columns, setting expectations on aggregated values, so finding max, min, average, those kinds of aggregate values on numerical data, as well as overall table valued expectations. For example, the exact set of column names, and you want to say that shouldn't change. If it ever does, let me know. Any questions on the kinds of expectations that can be set based off of just what you see here? There we go. And this was what really stood out to me as the growth mindset of this tool. It was very easy to run through the tutorial because it goes through, inspects your data, and makes a crude guess. Again, and that's one way to set expectations, is just say, set the tool, go look at it, and tell me what kinds of expectations that you want to use. And probably you'll keep some of those, ditch some of the others. But then what you do as you test and iterate on that, you make a crude stab at it, and then you edit your expectation suite, save it, test again, iterate on that. And that stuck out to me as very growth mindset. I'm just gonna do something very crude. I'm up and running. Took me an hour. Walked through the tutorial. Great. It took me a half an hour when I ran through it on my own data. It was just that easy to walk through that interactive process. But then again, to then test and iterate and improve it is something that one could do 10 minutes a day and eventually get to a really healthy set of data quality expectations against the data. And that really appealed to me. And that's all well and good, but is it customizable, readable, all these things? Is it crazy? As I mentioned in the beginning. Customizable. So there are different ways, and again, this is just a figure from the website, to set expectations. You can take your domain knowledge and you can just write the config in a JSON file and pass that in through this introspection step here, second one down, that's that interactive workflow in Python. That's what it takes you through in the tutorial. And then I didn't look much into the data assistance workflow. But again, understanding, I did look into this, and again, just creating your own metadata and exposing that in the end result so that next to an expectation, you can say, actually, this is probably expected to fail at this moment. And it shows up in the documentation of the validation phase of testing your expectations. Here's an example of it. You can judge for yourself if it's readable. I think it's all right. Everything on here basically is interactable, and you can do a deep dive on it, which you'll see here. For example, as I went through the tutorial process, it was an automatic expectation that was set that there should be exactly no more, no less than 75,000 rows, which was the sample that I passed in, which was approximately half of the data set. And upon reiterating on that, on the full data set, it failed that expectation because now there's more data. But that's an example of a failure, and that's fine. But that's essentially what it looks like. And here's this example of an expectation to pass, which was look at the entire table and let me know that all of the column names are still there and haven't changed. No one re-aliased something. So thank you for that. And I think it's fairly readable. It has some automation. There are capabilities to send emails, Slack notifications after a cron job runs on validating a set of expectations. Can connect to different engineering workflows. Kind of mention some of this interpretable aspect that they say expectations are data documentation and vice versa. They say it a little bit differently than that, but I can't exactly remember how they put it. But that these two things are the same thing. That this basically can serve as your documentation, just as well as the fact that this is the test stuff. it's scalable because you can batch things into the tool, or sample if that is your preference. And it's integrable with a lot of different reference architectures. They've done a ton of work to make that happen, I'm sure. And, fair play. Mention that there's other things. We don't have to build anything. We can just buy stuff. There are other things out there. I am curious if any in the room or on Zoom are using one of these tools to do data quality assurance. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how they might compare to what I've shown you from Great Expectations this evening. But with that, I've got some reference material in the appendix, but I'm happy to take any further questions you have about what I learned diving into Great Expectations. Thank you very much.
We've been a very quiet group, but I'm wondering if you have comments on the talk or questions, things that you are doing in your practice.
Well, I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
So when you're approaching data quality, how involved are you bringing your stakeholders? People who are actually using the data.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. We have a few different levels of stakeholders, and I think that's essentially the answer there, is that when thinking about data quality and even where data quality needs to improve with how we're using our particular source of data, it just really depends on how close that individual is to this data and how data literate they are. For example, we have two parts to our team. We have a data team that supports a specific product with our company, which is intended to be data driven. We have another, actually 2/3 of our team is more concerned with implementing and making our data actionable. And so with those individuals, they come to us to understand data quality, but they're not digging into it themselves necessarily because they're worried about operationalizing things. And so specifically with that group, we can make them very aware, like, hey, don't touch, this segment of the data because it's kind of on fire right now and we're fixing it. And hopefully that kind of gets at it. But for example, managers that are responsible for our client relationships tend to be very financially literate, but not necessarily very in the weeds on data per se, and they're not getting exposure to this.
Well, yeah, I bring it up because it's a two-way street. One, in my experience building any type of data quality platform, engaging like data analysts, business intelligence folks, they are a treasure trove of knowledge with problem with data, because they spend their whole day building solutions around bad data. And then second, and I love the documentation. I actually haven't deployed Great Expectations, but the second is engaging with people on having documentation that's automatically produced to show them, like, answer their data quality questions. Because as a data engineer, but a lot of my career is answering data quality questions, like, hey, is it fresh? Is it good? So it's both ways, engaging both on product creating the documentation, so you're not having to do that. Let the robots take care of that for you, but also engaging with groups to get that out of them. And yeah, domain knowledge. I mean, I've done the demo too, where like you step through their recommended. It's the interactive thing is interesting, but really you get the most impactful by those.
Yeah, and I will say additionally, for the specific product that I support, the analysts that are attached, that we're all on the same team. And we're pretty small right now, but again, how we scale, and again with removing data silos within our organization, there are going to be more people that start to access that, ask us questions. And in that case, having ready-made documentation to support that would be a great, a great way to start off in that process.
If you get people started on that instead of asking you the question, that's all great.
Right. We nip it in the bud and take care of those problems from the get-go. Awesome. Thanks for that encouragement. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Couple things. One is probably more of a dev's office type thing, and then the other is just, yeah, but.
Good. I'm totally here for that. Thank you.
I'm gonna screw up your acronym first. I think you ought to add reproducible in there.
Yeah. a good one.
And from that is.
We can go crazier. It's fine. We
There
can
you
always
go.
go crazier.
But I found it is reproducible because you're not gonna be able to continue screwing with the interactive. The interactive is nice to build it from scratch, but then if you need to move it to different environments, different things or whatever, that's going to become we're human, so it's gonna be human error. I mean, you're gonna have, there's just issues that you can have potentially with it.
Mhm. Yeah, all those times people thought they were doing the same thing in an implementation of an engineering workflow, and we're not doing the same thing at all.
For everyone that has worked on this, on a support desk, the user always lies, whether they mean to or not, they always lie.
Mm.
The other thing is you've got your expectations, they're working well, and then I mean, it's been chugging along for 12, 18 months, then you realize, yeah, not so much. There's a big hole that we missed. At that point, what do? Do you just have a demarcation? Sucks before this, good after this, or you go back and redo everything? And by redo, it's not just the expectations, but it's everything post that, so that you can, compare it to before this.
Mhm.
Basically, you can compare the data before and after and all that.
Great Expectations specifically states that it does not version your data. That is up to you and your process. And I think that answers your question.
I think it.
No.
Not quite?
It addresses
As far as what it is, but it's like how you're going to use it, how you
Mhm.
explain it when you're starting to do comparisons.
Right.
And that's, I mean, is that
My initial
everyone's just different depending on the case, probably?
Yeah, my initial thought on that question, like something's changed, you realize you missed a really important edge case. This is maybe not proper even to call it an edge case, but you missed something. What do you do at that point? My initial feeling is that goes beyond the scope of this, as far as how do you, operationalize that insight that you missed something.
Which makes sense. And I mean, for this, it's like you fix it and then you just have to go and figure out how are you going to compare the good and the bad for the period and then pass it.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And you can just update your expectations going forward. You found this big hole, you update your expectations going forward. Typically, when I'm running tools like this, I'm running on data that's coming into my data. So I'm checking the data as it's coming in. I might do some aggregate checks once I put it into my warehouse and parts. But it's an alerting tool. It's telling you, is it good, bad, red, yellow, green, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not
It's just
gonna-
one of those that now you let this big hole go into your data. I mean, you're right. It's outside the scope of this per se, but
But the beauty is,
the elephant's still in the room.
beauty is you discover this, and instead of other places. So back when I first got started, we didn't have great tools like this. We rolled around, and it was very easy to catch a data problem. You thought you put in tests around it. It was this configurable, and your production. You thought you fixed something, worse versus something like this. You find it, it's awesome tests.
Right, which I do like that about.
The other thing that's great about this is that you can tie this into your source control. It's all text files. It's all configurable. That was one thing, like source controllable. You didn't call that out explicitly, but that
Yeah, you're right. I didn't, but that is actually a really good point because I didn't call that because it wasn't in my written. But yeah, you can actually. They're just JSON files, so
Yeah.
you can check them in. Version your expectations.
Each version, but chances are, I mean, like some of that stuff, it's version where you can just say, this is what I did, but if you go and look at a diff, of course you did. I mean, it's, because like I said, it's JSON, so it can be very difficult to determine exactly what happened, but it's at least something.
the expectation itself, like, like this shouldn't be null, like whenever start anyone on anything, you always primary key on table should be unique and not null.
Mhm.
What?
That's the first thing you're doing, any type of thing should be primary keys should be unique, not null. You can be surprised when someone starts running that on their data. It is not the case. It is horrifying. Because but just starting there and just kind of iterate.
I'm gonna break in just a second and see if there are some voices on Zoom. I looked through and there's some really interesting personalities there and different perspectives. I would love to hear from, I know Reed Huffman is there, Alice Leach is there.
Alice had to leave, but yeah.
Emmanuel is there. I don't want to put the three of you on the spot, but there have to be some voices. And what I'm interested in is maybe not questions about the talk, but where does the quality fit in your process? Is it in engineering? Is it in data science? How does it affect what you're doing? So forgive me for putting you on the spot, but I would love to have some participation, some voices from Zoom if they are. Is that volume up for them?
Yeah, not sure how well they heard you here from the puck at the back of the room, but yeah, definitely interested to hear some takeaways from anyone on Zoom.
I can jump in. This is Reed Huffman. Thanks for calling me out, Glenn. I'm curious, Nathan, as you have been interacting with Great Expectations, I was looking at this tool for our team and ran into the issue of this, tends to, you've got to point it at a specific table, and how, if you're getting different layouts for these different tables, how you, I guess, was that a problem that you ran into and had to try and troubleshoot?
Can you describe maybe a little bit more detail what you mean by table layouts specifically?
Yeah. So we work with a lot of different vendors, eligibility vendors, and they tend to all have their own layout of here's the eligibility file that we're going to send you, and how to use Great Expectations when you are trying to scale to 100 different tables that may all have slight variations on the table structure.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely identify with that even very particular use case that you're describing of, and I think it does depend on the scale. If you're talking about 100 different tables, I'm really talking about, depending on how you count it, maybe 20. And honestly, we sort of pare that down ourselves in moving out of our warehouse and our mart to about 5. But so maybe a slightly different order of magnitude there for the issue. But what I like about Great Expectations is that test and iterate process. So you go through this interactive process on all your tables. You've got something there, and then you can very slowly test and iterate and make it work across all your current data sources. And I think that's probably an advantage in that case. But I don't know of any tool, and I'd happily learn, that can really solve for something that, but Alex might.
Yeah, so the way I solve for that is you create a mapping layer So you map everything into a common data model. So you have, maybe 100 different versions of a single eligibility thing. You map it into a single table, and then you run all of your expectations in that mapped layer. So you're not then having to create 100 different of the same test. You're creating one test, and then you're just managing those mappings. Because in 100 different tables, you might have a lot of common columns that you're not having to worry about. So then you're just having to manage the different columns and what those different columns all map into a common column.
Yeah. And for example, our data vendor does that for us.
We're lucky.
Yes and no. Sometimes they map things differently for different sources, and that causes its own pain having that done externally from our team, and that can have its own pain because it's not mapped.
Right. So it sounds like the solution is, yeah, try to move the great expectations as far down the downstream as you can.
It's a balance. You don't want to go too far downstream because you catch things later. You want to try and do it not like on the super front end, but like really, I like that mapping layer is that sweet spot right before it starts going to your data warehouse, because then you're protecting your data warehouse. To me, that's the biggest value of these tools is I protect my data warehouse from bad data going in by running tests, and this is regardless of great expectation, DQ, DBT test. You're running this before you push it into your data warehouse, because in a mapped layer, okay, bad data goes in there, not a big deal. Once it gets into your data warehouse, little bad gets into your data marts and BI tools, that's where you're in trouble. Right. So you should be testing at every level, but starting at that map layer is more attractive.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks for that.
Thanks one more time. We're a little bit over as far, we have some time for previous meetings and things like that, but let's tell Nathan, thanks for his time.
Happy to talk data, happy to talk transitions out of academia, and any of the other things that you know about me from this document. Thanks all.